Welcome back for a new video for Halloween themed month of October. Just gonna show my horror collection slash some that are more supernatural, but in order that I would recommend checking them out. First stuff without cases, then what DVDs I have in case, and then Blu-ray. With that said, first of stuff, in other words, less likely I would recommend, depending on your taste, is a film called Hanging Man's Curse. Now, basic know about it is basically it's a Christian suspense horror film. So, yeah, it's an acquired taste. I don't think it's really creepy in the least, personally. Next, we have a so-so vampire film called Vampires. Yeah, Assistant. I'm not sure what to really think about this film. It's definitely not creepy in the least. It's a 50-50 film for me. Out of vampire films, it is one of my least favorite. Still interesting for what it is. Next we have a film called just Modern Vampires, another so-so vampire film. Then we have one that I'll admit is kind of a guilty pleasure of mine, that I know a lot of people would not enjoy probably, but I like it. Even though I know it's not a good film, I just like the over-the-top craziness of Ron Perlman and, of course, Nicolas Cage. Another less well-known film called Godson. A bit more suspense than actual horror, and it's a so-so film overall. Dark Town, another so-so more B-rated horror film. I do have my weakness, though, for some B-rated horror films. Next is out of haunting films with the title, it's probably, in my opinion, the weakest one. The Haunting of Molly Hartley. This next film is supposed to be based on a what-if scenario. What if Aleister Crowley somehow was revived and brought back to life? So needless to say, it's an interesting, but it's definitely not a film for everyone, I would say. Next we have the not quite as liked sequel to the cult classic Donnie Darko with S. Darko. Then we have a vampire film that I do kind of enjoy, I will admit, from time to time, but it's definitely an acquired taste film with Priest. Next, another acquired taste, which is why I have it a little bit lower on here. The original classic Wicker Man, not the newer Nicolas Cage one. The original is very different, and also, basically the main villain is actually the late great Sir Christopher Lee. Back when he had like a full regular head of hair, plus it wasn't all gray. Given this film was released in the 70s, but like I said, it's definitely not for everyone, this film. Jaws 2, another film not for everyone. Then we have The Lost Brothers, or The Lost Boys, with the direct video sequel, The Lost Brothers, or Lost Boys Tribe. Don't know why I keep saying Lost Brothers when I mean Lost Boys. Here's one that's a somewhat 50-50 with me, Interview with a Vampire. Though it definitely has popular fans. Film I like more than some people, The Right, with, of course, Sir Anthony Hopkins, from the early 2010s. A cult classic from the 90s, and I'm not a fan of the remake. But with that said, The Craft is definitely a classic from the 90s. Probably one of the most unique vampire films I have personally seen is this one, Daybreakers. It's definitely unique and different, and does have some great acting talent as well involved in the film. And it's a vampire film I actually recommend checking out if you want some not your traditional vampire film. Next we have a reasonably well-known movie here with Gothica, but then with one of the worst cover songs of all time, of course, that being Limp Bizkit covering Behind Blue Eyes by The Who. Still, the movie itself is so. If you like Halle Berry, you may enjoy it. Next, we have a somewhat decent, I think, suspense film. No real horror in it. Still good. Stephen King's Bag of Bones. Starring, of course, a former Bond, Pierce Brosnan, which is one of the main reasons I actually like the film, because of Pierce Brosnan. Also, of course, can't forget the classics from the 2000s, Underworld and Underworld Evolution. Also another classic from like the late 90s, Queen of the Damned. Pretty decent vampire flick. Sleepy Hollow, a personal favorite of mine that I do recommend checking out. The original classic 70s, Carrie, which I consider an all-time classic. Then we have a very interesting horror film I think is criminally underrated. It's called The Visitation. If you've never seen it, check it out. Another, I think, somewhat overhated or disliked, and I don't know why it gets it, that I personally like, and is, of course, based on the Stephen King novel, Dreamcatcher. I'm personally a fan of the Dreamcatcher movie. I will admit that it's a guilty pleasure of mine, because I know a lot of people don't like it. Next, we have a classic from the 90s, one of my personal favorite vampire films, and of course that is Bram Stoker's Dracula, with Gary Oldman, of course, in it. A film also from the early 2010s I like more than a lot of people, The Possession. Another classic film from Warner Brothers from the 90s I personally really like, I think is somewhat underrated, is Ghost Ship. Also a great, I think, become a cult classic, The Cabin in the Woods. Here is probably, in my opinion, one of the most underrated horror films I've seen in modern times. Great film based on actually an interesting novel called House. And it, by the way, if you have HBO Max, this is available on HBO Max. I don't know about any other streaming services, though. Also, can't forget, towards the end of this part, the original classic Jaws film you can't beat. Of course, one of my all-time favorites, pretty much about my favorite film from M. Night Shyamalan, Signs. Of course, can't forget the original classic, one of my all-time favorite slasher films, the original classic Child's Play. Of course, the original classic from Spielberg, Poltergeist, which has quite on record a lot of weird stuff happening on the set. And also, this, which is double-sided, has Poltergeist 2 and Poltergeist 3. Next, towards the end, Insidious Chapter 2. Of course, the original Conjuring, which I consider a must-see sinister. And of these I recommend the most is the great, highly beloved The Sixth Sense. Pause this. Welcome to the next batch. First up is technically not a horror film, it's more of a really weird, sort of creepy and out there, like, I guess you could say kids film, but it is really out there, the artistic style and everything is really bizarre, but I actually think it's a perfect film for maybe the whole family Halloween, though even I think this film will probably give some younger kids possibly bad dreams and stuff, but I love the really weird out there art style. But first up, I'd suggest check out Mirror Mask. Next is a couple of things from Actual History Channel that I really like and I recommend. If you like history but you want something creepier for Halloween with a little bit of learning, check out these two sets. I highly recommend Haunted Histories Collection, America's Most Haunted Places, and also Haunted Histories Collection, Dracula, Witches, Voodoo, and Exorcism. Next is actually one of the things I am reviewing this month, and that's the BBC series called Intruders, which is supernatural based, and I'm sure you would recognize some of the cast. Specifically these two. If you're a fan of Doctor Who, you know this actor. And you know him from True Blood and many other things. Next up, only have a small amount of the American Horror Story stuff, physical. But the first, I think the weaker ones, American Horror Story Asylum, which does have pretty cool cover art on the case. One of my personal favorites, American Horror Story Freak Show. American Horror Story Coven, which I know is one of the most popular. Arguably my favorite the first few seasons, American Horror Story Murder House. And the last of the set of this stuff I highly recommend the most is the special Nightmare on Elm Street collection, which I got a few years ago. And yeah, it's pretty much every one of the original films as you see right here. And you can find this a lot of times around this time of year at Walmart for $20 for every Freddy film. I consider that dirt cheap and great for such a great collection of classic slasher. And welcome back for the last bit. First, though more family friendly, which is why it's at the top of the recommendations. Of course, starring Jack Black, of course, the theatrical Goosebumps film, which I still have to say is quite enjoyable. I think it's a great family-friendly film. Next, we have a film that I like more than some people, the prequel, of course, in the Underworld series, Rise of the Lycan. Next, we have more of an interesting time period piece with elements of horror and suspense, more so than being full-out horror. But it is a good time period piece to get the culture and stuff of the time period. And that is, of course, the indie film, The Witch. Next, we have the first of the two, of course, remake films based on the beloved Stephen King book, of course, It. Or as I call it now, It Chapter 1. Speaking of, next we have It Chapter 2. Then, a bit lower, yeah, but I still recommend people checking out Silent Hill Revelation, which is coming out the end of this week. You can look forward to the review of this film. And towards the middle, we have, I think, one of my, probably my favorite slasher film to come out in the 90s personally, and that is I Know What You Did Last Summer, with the great opening scene with hearing the water crashing and stuff, and having the music, that great cover, Summer Breeze, from, of course, Typo Negative, great goth group from the 90s. First, if I recommend highly, I do recommend everyone check out the last Aliens film by Ridley Scott, Alien Covenant. I still think it's a superb, great film in my opinion. And just barely above is Prometheus, which I think is a superb, great, one of my personal favorite prequel films of all time. And I think it's criminally overhated, and I don't know why so many people dislike it. Of course, we have arguably my personal favorite season of American Horror Story with Hotel, and of course the first season starring Lady Gaga. Then we have, of course, Insidious Chapter 3, which was technically sort of a prequel, I guess you could say. But I still like it, nevertheless. And I do recommend it, actually for a lot of people. If you like horror, check this film out. It's easily the second best of the series. Toward getting close to the end, yeah, I know it's not really scary in the least, but heck, I even rewatched today, funny enough, for, I don't know, the 30-something time, The original classic Stephen King's It miniseries with Tim Curry is superb and will always be great in my opinion. And the fact you can watch it on almost any streaming service makes it even better. It's very easy to check out. Seriously, do yourself a favor and check the film out. Easily, the only Resident Evil film I recommend to anyone to check out is the original live action film, which I still love. Of course, I reviewed this film last year if you're at all interested in my opinion on it. If not, still, I do highly recommend it. Third to last, definitely highly recommend, which over time has become my favorite of the Conjuring universe, and that being Annabelle Creation. Never did I think I would end up loving this film as much as I have. I have now seen this movie like 12 times. Love it. And I continue to watch it, and I will watch it again this month. Second to last of highly recommendations is the original classic from Ridley Scott, the original Alien. With, of course, starring one of, I think, my personal favorite female characters in film, Ripley. But seriously, if you've never watched the original Alien, do yourself a favor and check this film out. It's easily accessible. Last but not least, of course, the very beloved and pretty much my #1 favorite live-action adaptation game movie of all time was Silent Hill. Reviewed that film also last October, and like I said, later this week I'll be reviewing its sequel. But with that said, I'll see y'all next time, and this is just some great horror film recommendations and stuff, and just show, now I may have missed a few here and there that I misplaced, but definitely overall, I'm a big fan of horror and always have been. But anyways, with that said, I hope everyone has a good rest of October and a good, happy Halloween season.